We seem to live in a society in the United States of America where the concept of facing reality seems to have fallen by the wayside. There is a very prominent school of thought, and you find it in various quarters, that people can actually make things happen that they want to happen if they only believe. There was a Christmas song by Josh Groban that suggested that. In the world of Christendom, I don't say Christianity, but Christendom, there is the prosperity gospel where people believe if they only have faith and say the right word that they can make things happen. And there are a lot of things that happen in our society that are we're just so much against those things that we cannot seem to face the reality that they actually are happening. I sometimes wonder how people manage to survive from day to day, considering that they insist on believing whatever it is that they want to believe, despite facts and circumstances, despite all kinds of signs pointing in the opposite direction. People insist on believing what they want to believe. Now, there are a lot of people in the United States who only believe Fox News and conservative talk radio. Those are the sources that they believe credible. And whatever those sources report, that's what those people want to believe. There are others who want to believe what mainstream media reports. CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, the New York Times, various daily newspapers. They only want to believe what those sources report. So Fox News, of course, is the conservative house organ, and the mainstream media is a house organ for certain types of Democratic candidates. The Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris mold, those are the kinds of Democratic politicians that the mainstream media supports, and they report things favorable to those people. And the problem with all of these sources, the conservative sources as well as those other sources, is they all have agendas, and they report what they want to happen and what they want other people to believe. And it certainly does work. People insist on believing a lot of things despite reality. Now, in the 2016 election, the impending Donald Trump victory provoked such hysteria, such wrath, I guess even such fear in certain quarters, that people simply refused to accept it. And with the polling organizations and even with Moody's, I really think that they were feeling pressure and such wrath from these sources that they thought we can't report that. And maybe even they themselves believe this can't be happening, this can't be right. And so they insisted that Hillary Clinton was about to win the presidency. Well, of course, that wasn't reality at all. Of course, she lost under the Electoral College system, which isn't going anywhere because it's almost impossible to get rid of under the U.S. Constitution. But, there was a denial of reality, and Trump did win. Now, recently, Moody's Analytics has come forward with some models suggesting that Donald Trump may in fact win a landslide in 2020, and this is based largely on the economy. It's very true that people do vote more on the economy than they do on other issues. This has certainly been true since at least 1932, when Herbert Hoover and the Republican Party were punished tremendously for failing to do enough about the Great Depression, and they absolutely did fail to do enough. Now, they did take various measures which undoubtedly prevented a worse collapse than did occur, but it wasn't enough to get the economy moving in the right direction, and people turned out in force to elect FDR. And certainly since that time, the economy has always been the main thing. What do I mean by the economy? Well, basically I mean whether the gross domestic product is increasing or decreasing. If the economy is growing, the GDP increases. If it is declining, the GDP decreases. And that is the thing that affects people, their perceptions of the economy more than anything else. Is it growing or is it declining? If it's declining, an incumbent who is in office at that time is almost certainly sure to lose. If, on the other hand, it's increasing, then an incumbent who is in office most certainly will win. And that has been true for many decades, And now Moody's is predicting that if the economy holds steady, that if GDP growth stays in positive territory over the next 12 months, Donald Trump will win, possibly in a landslide. And historically, it's always been that way. People are afraid to bet against an economy that isn't growing. Now, a growing economy doesn't mean that everybody's prosperous. A shrinking economy is definitely bad for most people, but a growing economy doesn't mean everyone's prosperous. With a growing GDP, you still have a tremendous poverty and a lot of problems and people stuck in part-time jobs and low-wage jobs and that kind of thing. But the general feeling is at least the economy is growing and opportunities may come sooner or later. That is the general feeling that most people have. So I would say that the Moody's current snapshot of the American political situation is actually probably right. They have been correct in every presidential election since 1980, and except for 2016, where there was a lot of mass hysteria against a Trump victory, they have been right every single time. I'm not going to call that good. I'm not necessarily going to call it terrible either. I would like to see a different type of candidate win the presidency. I don't know that my type of candidate could ever win because I'm just different in a lot of ways. I have some ideas that are liberal and even radical, and others that people would consider very conservative. And so I'm hard to categorize. I state that the candidate that I support in 2020 is Bernie Sanders, but I have issues even with him. Even though he seems to be the best person running, I still have issues with him, and I'm not inclined to support other Democrats. I don't really like Donald Trump, but it could come to a situation where people don't feel they have a choice but to elect Trump, because there are lots of different kinds of views out there. And that's the current situation. Now that could change. If the economy takes a nosedive, then it wouldn't be hard for almost anybody to beat Donald Trump. That would, be academic. Whoever ran against him would probably win. But if GDP growth continues in positive territory, then there's a very good chance, it's more likely than not, that he will win. And people are struggling to accept that possible fact. As I've indicated, it depends on what happens with the economy, what happens with the GDP growth over the next year or so. Things could turn around. Of course, it'd be foolish to want the economy to decline, because that is very, very bad for a lot of people. Not that growth pulls people out of poverty, because it doesn't necessarily, but negative growth is a very bad thing. So in spite of the fact that he's extremely unpopular, he does have the advantage. A lot of people said they couldn't stand to vote. They couldn't stand Bill Clinton personally, but they still voted for him because of what the economy was doing that time with GDP growth. But, this to say that what Moody's has said, it angers people. It angers people because there are so many of us, whether you're right, left, center, or whatever, who persist in believing what we want to believe. But I would have to say that the Moody's model, assuming things don't change very much with the U.S. economy, or assuming it continues in positive growth, they're more likely to be right than wrong. So I may not spend the next year obsessed with politics, because actually there's very little that I can do about it. Anyway, we do have an issue with facing reality in the United States. That is a tremendous problem for many Americans, facing what is real, facing what is reality. And sometimes I wonder how people survive from day to day when they only believe what they want to believe, regardless of facts or circumstances.